Resumes. We'll move to questions without notice. Senator Mariel Smith.
My question is to the Minister for Aged Care and Senior Australians, Senator Colbeck. Today, before walking out of the chamber and turning his back on scrutiny of the Senate, the minister referred to his management of aged care and, I quote, a high watermark. Last week, the minister admitted that, and I quote, in some circumstances we haven't got it right. Can the minister tell us today what hasn't he got right?
The Minister for Aged Care and Senior Australians, Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thanks, Senator, for a question. Mr. President, I was very deliberate with what I said in my presentation to the Senate this morning. I have great respect for the processes of the Senate, and it's an important process that we follow here. Mr. President, and I have said, and the Prime Minister said on a number of occasions, that there's some things that we haven't got right. We've quoted the example of the time when we had 24 hours to find a completely new staffing force in Basils in Melbourne, where things didn't happen in the way that we hoped that they might, Mr. President. So we've been very open with respect to those things. I have acknowledged in this place a number of times this week, and I did it again this morning, that I should have had the mortality numbers with me last Friday when I appeared before the Senate committee. I've admitted on and acknowledged that on a number of occasions, and I've apologised on a number of occasions quite appropriately, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, we've been very open about the circumstance in Victoria. We've continued to build the effort. We've continued to build our response to ensure that Victorians in aged care get the quality of care that we've deserved, and the proof of the pudding of that is in the results that we're seeing now in residential aged care facilities, where we've actually improved the number of facilities that are on our red list from 13 a few weeks ago when we established the Victorian Aged Care Response Centre, now to 3. And Mr. President, in my briefing this morning, we only specifically had to have conversations about 2 of those. So, Mr. President, we continue to work in the interests of senior Australians, and that's exactly what we'll continue to do.
Senator Smith, a supplementary question.
When did the minister first realise he hadn't got it right?
Senator Colbeck.
Mr. President, when the circumstances at St Basil's occurred in the way that they did, it was clearly obvious to me that we didn't get it right. If the Senate would like to check the record, we acknowledge that very quickly, and that's why we've continued to build the response that we've built in Victoria, to ensure that we do provide a high quality of care to senior Australians.
Point of order, Senator Cormann.
These are important and sensitive matters, and the minister is doing his best to provide answers to the questions, and he's constantly interrupted by interjections. Interjections are always disorderly.
Look, on the point of order, on the point of order, interjections are always disorderly. I generally apply the rule, as I do with questions, that the mood of the chamber is set by the questioner or the speaker. In this case, I would say both the questioner and the speaker are actually speaking in a rather respectful manner, and therefore it is not an appropriate time to be somewhat more boisterous. So I just remind senators of the standing orders. Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, we will continue to work towards the best interest of Victorian aged care residents in conjunction with the Victorian government, which we've done very cooperatively, particularly since we've been able to establish the Victorian Aged Care Response Centre, which has brought together, as I said this morning, the decision-making processes of the Victorian health system and the National Aged Care System to make sure that resources are available for the appropriate care of residents in aged care facilities that have COVID-19 outbreaks within them.
Senator Smith, a final supplementary question.
This week, the minister has boasted that despite more than 360 deaths in aged care, he has responded incredibly well, that we are in a relatively good position and extremely fortunate, and today referred to his handling as a high watermark. Why is this minister more focused on self-congratulation than getting it right?
Senator Colbeck.
Mr. President, the opposition continue to misstate my comments and twist them and use them in a way that I did not utter them, Mr. President. And quite frankly, the practice is dishonest, Mr. President. The practice is dishonest.
Order, Senator
Mr. President.
Wong, on point of order.
I take it well. I'd ask the minister to withdraw dishonest. Those are direct quotes.
Senator Cormann, on the point of order.
On the point of order, the minister is absolutely right that the way his statements are taken out of context is dishonest.
It is not. That term is not unparliamentary. It's not for the chair, nor is it appropriate for me to begin ruling on matters of interpretation such as that. It is not unparliamentary language, so I won't be asking the minister to withdraw. Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Labor Party this week have consistently taken my comments out of context in a deliberate attempt to portray what I've said in a different way. Mr. President, as I said earlier, I was very deliberate with my comments this morning. Very, very deliberate with my comments. And our circumstance in an international context is so much better than those overseas. So much better. Now, it doesn't mean, Mr. President, that doesn't mean that the circumstances here are difficult, that the circumstances here aren't tragic, and that the deaths that have been suffered are anything but tragic, Mr. President. It doesn't mean any of those things. But I am not going to—
Senator Colbeck. Senator Patterson.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is for the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Payne. Can the minister advise the Senate how the Morrison government is protecting and advancing Australia's interests by ensuring a consistent foreign policy?
The Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Payne.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I thank Senator Patterson for his question and his interest in particular in this issue. It is vital that Australia and all levels of government in Australia speak with one voice in our dealings with other countries. The Australian people expect and deserve that. That's why this government will introduce the Australia's Foreign Relations Bill 2020. The bill will require states and territories to consult the Foreign Minister on arrangements with foreign governments and other entities. The scheme will establish an approval regime and a notification regime. Both regimes apply to proposed and to existing arrangements. If they are proposed, the Foreign Minister is able to declare that they not proceed. If they are already in place, the Foreign Minister is able to declare that they are not valid. States or territories wanting to make an arrangement with a national government of another country or one of that government's departments or agencies will be required to notify and receive approval from the Foreign Minister. If a state or a territory wants to make an arrangement with a foreign entity, such as another state or province or a local government, the state or territory must notify the Foreign Minister. The Foreign Minister's approval in these instances just mentioned is not required. However, the Foreign Minister does have discretion to declare that they are invalid or that they not proceed if inconsistent with foreign policy. These laws will ensure that as a nation we are consistent in how we deal with the world and that we are all taking a national perspective in our national interest.
Senator Patterson, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can the minister inform the Senate about the test that will apply under the Australian Foreign Relations Bill 2020 to arrangements by states and territories with foreign governments?
Senator Payne.
Thank you, Mr. President. The legislation will provide a framework for the Commonwealth to measure state and territory arrangements against established foreign policy. The test is whether the Foreign Minister is satisfied that an arrangement or its negotiation does not adversely affect Australia's foreign relations, or is unlikely to do so, and is not inconsistent with Australia's foreign policy, or is unlikely to be so. If the minister is not satisfied, he or she will have to refuse approval or may declare an existing arrangement to be invalid, or may declare that negotiations not be continued. Subsidiary arrangements entered into under the auspices of an invalid arrangement may also be invalidated. Mr. President, for transparency, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade will also be maintaining a publicly accessible register of decisions.
Senator Patterson, final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can the minister advise the Senate why this bill is necessary?
Senator Payne.
Mr. President, the government has identified, from an open-source search, at least 135 arrangements between states and territories and foreign governments across 30 countries. We can't say with certainty how many more there are, a fact that underscores why this bill is necessary. To date, there's been no requirement that states and territories consult with the Commonwealth on these arrangements, and therefore no opportunity for Commonwealth expertise to be applied. That is the work of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in particular. We don't want to impede business links. We don't want to impede people-to-people links. As an outward-looking trading nation, Australia wants those relationships. We benefit from them. Rather, the legislation will give state and territory governments confidence that they are acting in a way that serves Australia's national interests and assure Australians that we are exercising due diligence in our international engagements.
Senator Sheldon.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to Minister for Aged Care and Senior Australian, Senator Colbeck. How is it that the minister's strongest defence of the failure to listen to the warning of Dorothy Henderson Lodge is, as I quote, "We talked"? Why did the minister fail to listen to this warning and take real action to ensure the events at Dorothy Henderson Lodge were not repeated?
The Minister for Aged Care and Senior Australians, Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. Mr President, I wouldn't agree with what Senator Sheldon has just said, Mr President, because we actually did start very quickly implementing issues that raised at Dorothy Henderson Lodge. So, Mr President, one of the things that we saw at Dorothy Henderson Lodge, and I actually have answered this question before in question time earlier this week, Mr President, is that we very quickly learnt the issues around workforce, and at Dorothy Henderson Lodge we didn't at that point in time have our surge workforce provisions in place, and we had to rely on some capacity from New South Wales Health, which they provided. But within a week of Dorothy Henderson Lodge, we actually did have our surge workforce processes in place, Mr President. Our contracts were in place very quickly. So, as I've said, and I said this morning, as this pandemic has progressed, as we've learned things that we need to address, we've continued to do that, Mr President. And so, Mr President, we actually did put surge workforce into place. We announced the $101 million on the 11th of March, Mr President, which was only 7 days after the Dorothy Henderson Lodge outbreak commenced.
Senator Sheldon, a supplementary question.
Senator Fierravanti-Wells, former Shadow Minister for Ageing, has said, and I quote, "The Aged Care Sector Committee has effectively only been a talkfest committee, with little progress made over the years since it was established in 2014. Did the minister fail to listen to the warning of Dorothy Henderson Lodge and take real action, because the Morrison government is all talk and no action?"
Senator Colbeck.
Mr President, I think for Senator Sheldon to try and diminish the work that's being done by people who are serving the sector, I think is unfortunate, Mr President. I think is unfortunate. And Mr President, one of the reasons that we called a Royal Commission was we wanted to have a forensic look at the entire sector. And if Senator Sheldon had been watching the Royal Commission closely, he would have seen that one of the questions that the Royal Commission is actually asking us is the relationship between the sector and government. And I think it's a very appropriate question, so I support the comments of Senator Fierravanti-Wells in that context, because the relationship between the sector and government is an extremely important one. So I look forward to the recommendations of the Royal Commission in that sense, Mr President. And I don't agree with Senator Sheldon with respect to the circumstances that came out of Dorothy Henderson Lodge.
Senator Colbeck, time for the answers expired. Senator Sheldon, a final supplementary question.
The Morrison Cabinet failed to listen to the interim report of the Royal Commission entitled Neglect, the warnings from the Northern Hemisphere, the warnings from experts and unions, the warnings of Dorothy Henderson Lodge in March and Newmarch House in April. How many of the more than 360 older Australians who have died in aged care would be alive if this minister had done more than just talked?
Senator Colbeck.
Mr President, well, I clearly reject the premise of the question that Senator Sheldon's just put, because this government has continued to act and build its response to the COVID-19 pandemic in aged care as that response has required to be grown, Mr President, and I've mentioned that a number of times during this week, so I reject the premise of the question put to me by Senator Sheldon. We have, and I have seen those actions put into place every single day as I've worked alongside health officials from the Victorian Aged Care Response Centre and the officials from the caseworker team that look after every facility that has a COVID-19 outbreak. We've consistently looked at the circumstances that have come from every other facility. We've looked at what we might learn. We've looked at what we might do differently. We consistently ask ourselves what we might do differently. We have acted, Mr President, on the advice of the HPPC and the health professionals to ensure that we do the best that we can provide for senior Australians.
We will be going online to order. I remind senators just to be quiet during the question because sometimes we don't have the best volume. Senator Steele-John.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Attorney-General. Minister, the Disability Royal Commission has been running since September of 2019, and many people and organisations have made submissions and shared their stories. However, there is a large group of disabled people who have not and cannot, because the Commission cannot currently guarantee their protection and confidentiality beyond the life of the Commission. One person in particular springs to mind, a woman who is right at the beginning of her educational career, has suffered discrimination in that career, including in the school that she now works. She tells me that she will not tell her story until she can be assured that it won't in itself end her career. Will the Attorney-General apologise to people who have not been able to tell their stories because of his failure to act and do what he has been promising to do, which is introduce these protections to Parliament, which he has known about the need for since February of this year?
The Minister representing the Attorney-General, Senator Payne.
Thank you very much, Mr President. I thank Senator Steele-John for his question. Senator, I will take the issues that you have raised on notice to the Attorney-General and seek advice from him in response to those.
Senator Steele-John, a supplementary question.
Thank you. Disabled people, our families and our organisations have been urging the government to introduce privacy protections to guarantee safety and confidentiality of submissions. The issue was flagged last November by the Chair of the Commission, and in February he did write formally to the government. After months of advocacy, it was believed that the government is intending to introduce legislation during the next sitting week of Parliament. Can the Attorney-General confirm the intention to introduce this legislation in the next sitting week?
Senator Payne.
Mr President, as I advised Senator Steele-John earlier, I don't have this detailed information with me. I will most certainly take it on notice and return to the chamber as soon as possible with that advice, Senator.
Senator Steele-John, a final supplementary question.
On page 37 of the Royal Commission's second progress report, the Chair noted that the limitations of confidentiality are impeding people's willingness to give evidence and therefore affecting the scope of the Commission's work. We are now a year into a process that was meant to take 3 years in total, and the issue has not been resolved. Does the Attorney-General acknowledge that his failure to act has served as an impediment to disabled people telling our stories to our Commission?
Senator Payne.
Mr President, I thank Senator Steele-John for the further supplementary. As I understand it, the Attorney-General is considering matters relating to confidentiality protections. Certainly any information provided to the Royal Commission is protected while the inquiry continues. But as I said, Senator Steele-John, and I apologise that I don't have the detail to your specific questions with me here in the chamber today, will take it on notice and I will return to the chamber as soon as possible with that advice for you.
Senator Walsh.
My question is to the Minister for Aged Care and Senior Australians, Senator Colbeck. According to Mr Morrison, Kalina Care notified the Department of Health it had a positive COVID-19 outbreak on 27 July, and testing of residents and staff commenced the next day. On what date was the testing of all residents and staff completed?
The Minister for Aged Care and Senior Australians, Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. I don't have a detailed brief on time of each of the testing cycles, Mr President, because what happens when an outbreak's advised, we send a first responder nurse in immediately to assess the site, and we also send our sonic teams in to commence testing both residents and staff. But, Mr President, because not all staff are rostered on the same day and they come in over cycles, sometimes it does take a couple of days to complete the testing of all the staff, Mr President. So I'm very happy to bring that information back to the chamber. I think it's a fair question, it's an appropriate question, but I don't have the detailed information with respect to the testing cycles of all the staff members and when that information has come back, Mr President. I'm happy to provide that on notice to the chamber.
Senator Walsh, a supplementary question.
In the same answer, the Prime Minister said a surge workforce was provided to Kalina Care on 31 July. Who was staffing Kalina Care from 27 July until the surge workforce was provided 4 days later?
Senator Colbeck.
Mr President, when the outbreak first occurred and when the epidemiology of the outbreak was being undertaken, the facility was providing its own staffing until it came to a stage where there had been enough that we understood who needed to be, who tested positive, what the staff shortages were, and the assessments of the site had been completed. And so that process started on day one. The close contacts were tracked and traced of the initial staff member, and as the understanding, Mr President, of who the close contacts were, who the positive staff members were, staff were progressively furloughed from the site, and the surge workforce was brought in to compensate for the loss of staff through the furloughing of those people.
Senator Walsh, a final supplementary question.
How many staff and how many residents at Kalina Care tested positive to COVID-19 in the 4 days between 27 July and 31 July?
Senator Colbeck.
Mr President, I don't have the list of the initial testing, Mr President, because my understanding of what occurred at that site was that there was a progressive testing of positives over a period of time, which is a function of COVID-19, Mr President. Different people incubate at different times, and so there has been a progressive growth in the number of positives in both staff and residents, purely, Mr President, because of the function of the virus. People don't incubate at the same rate, Mr President. So,
Senator Pratt.
So, Mr President, it may be that you're tested today and test negative, and 2 days later, which is the cycle under which we test, so we test every 72 hours, Mr President, they might not test positive for the second or third test, given that there's an incubation period of up to 14 days for COVID-19, Mr President.
Senator Wong, on a point of order.
Mr President, I would ask that the minister do the right thing and come in at the end of question time to answer the 3 questions he was unable to answer. I think that would be a courtesy to the chamber.
Senator, we're going online again. Senator Hanson. I think you're on mute, Senator Hanson.
Right, can you hear me now?
Yep, all good. Thank you, Senator Hanson.
My question is for the Treasurer, to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Cormann. Today's paper announced the government's intention to introduce legislation to unwind new and existing agreements between a foreign power and state government, local councils and/or universities when they are not in the national interest, giving this power to the Foreign Affairs Minister. The Australian people have seen our current Prime Minister approve the sale of Australia's largest dairy farm, Moon Lake, in Tasmania to the Chinese when he was the Treasurer. Also, the former Trade Minister, Andrew Robb, is now working for the Chinese company Landbridge, who bought the Port of Darwin on a 99-year lease. How do you intend to instil confidence in the Australian people and myself that the national interest will come before possible self-interest or the United Nations and free trade agreements?
Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr President. The Australian government is responsible to make judgments when it comes to the national interest on our foreign affairs. And of course, the Australian government has the authority to determine what is in our national interest based on our democratic system. It is the Australian people ultimately who determine who gets to make those judgments on behalf of our nation. Australians rightly expect the Australian government they elect to set foreign policy. A primary focus of our government has been protecting and promoting the national interest. Now, of course, Australia is a globally focused open trading economy. We want to ensure that our exporting businesses can sell as many Australian products and services all around the world, including and in particular our agricultural sector, which sells our amazing agricultural produce into markets all around the world. So, of course, we continue to engage with our trading partners around the world, and we are also an economy which relies on foreign investment to reach its full potential. And we have a very sophisticated foreign investment review framework in place which ensures that any foreign investment that does come into Australia is not contrary to our national interest. So the Australian people can have confidence that through the measures that we have taken, governments of both persuasions in recent decades, but the measures that we are taking as we speak right now, the Australian government is taking steps to ensure that internationally Australia speaks with one voice when it comes to standing up for our national interests.
Senator Hanson, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Minister, your government has been hell-bent on foreign investment purporting it is in Australia's best interest. Please explain how approximately 700 multinational companies in Australia with a total combined turnover in the hundreds of billions of dollars only pay on average a combined $14 billion a year, or 4% of the total income tax collected in Australia, is in our best interest.
Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Thanks, Senator Hanson, for that supplementary. The Australian government is hell-bent on maximising the opportunity for Australians today and into the future to get ahead. And that is why we are committed to a set of policies and initiatives that maximise our economic growth opportunities, that maximise investment into our future growth, that maximise the opportunity for Australian businesses to be successful and hire more Australians, creating more jobs. Any business that operates in the Australian economy, of course, has to comply with our laws, including and in particular our tax laws. Our government has a proud record when it comes to making sure that multinational businesses operating in Australia comply with our tax laws. We have one of the toughest multinational anti-tax avoidance regimes in place in the world. We, of course, have worked with our international partners through the G20 and to implement all of the recommendations of the base erosion and profit shifting action plan. We have one of the toughest anti-avoidance regimes in the world.
Senator Hanson, a final supplementary question.
Thank you. Well, Minister, is it true that we collect approximately $400 million from our gas fields off the northwest shelf in Western Australia, yet their export value is approximately $54 billion a year? Again, where is this in Australia's best interest?
Senator Cormann.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Australia does draw a lot of benefit from our exporting activities, including and in particular the export of our oil and gas resources. It generates a lot of jobs for Australians. It generates a lot of trading opportunities, and of course, all these businesses have to comply with our tax laws. And company tax in Australia is paid on profits. It's paid on profits. It's not paid on income. It's paid on profits. And businesses with a large turnover have to pay 30% tax on their profits, and that is, of course, what all businesses across all sectors have to do.
Senator McLaughlin.
President, my question is for the Minister for Defence, Senator Reynolds. Can the minister outline how the Morrison government is updating Defence's strategic policy and sharpening its capability to protect Australia and its interests?
Minister for Defence, Senator Reynolds.
Well, thank you very much, Mr President, and I thank Senator McLaughlin for that question and for his support for defence industry in particular. The first role of the Australian government is to keep Australia and all Australians safe. The stark fact is that today, though, at the same time we are facing a pandemic-induced economic shock, our region is facing the most consequential strategic realignment since the end of World War II. Our national interests are being challenged more directly, and therefore we are demanding and we need a clear-eyed prioritisation of our defence forces. This is why, on my appointment as the Minister for Defence, I set 3 priorities for the defence portfolio: strategy, capability and reform. The 2020 Defence Strategic Update and accompanying Force Structure Plan are timely, comprehensive and have been well received. These documents addressed my first 2 priorities, strategy and also capability. They demonstrate that defence thinking and planning have shifted gears in response to the changes in our strategic environment. I've set 3 new military effects-based strategic objectives for defence. The first is to shape our strategic environment. The second is to deter actions against Australian interests. And thirdly is to be able to respond with credible military force when required. This government's clear-eyed approach demonstrates to Australians that their security and also their prosperity are our first priority. In relation to my 3rd priority, and that is reform, defence must continue to adapt and transform to ensure that we align strategy, capability with our financial resources, and I will be making further announcements on the direction of that transformational work later this year.
Senator McLaughlin, a supplementary question.
Yes, thank you, Mr President. Can the minister advise how the government is providing funding certainty to defence over the decade ahead?
Senator Reynolds.
Thank you again, Mr President. Over the next decade, this government has committed $270 billion in defence capability. This will transform Army, Air Force and Navy, and it develops 2 new military capability domains, one of space and the second information and cyber. This locks in our long-term funding commitment that we made in the 2016 White Paper. This unequivocally maintains long-term certainty for defence spending. Both defence and Australian defence industry rely on this funding stability, especially during this particularly challenging time for our economy. This financial year, as promised, we will meet 2% of GDP, and we've also decoupled defence funding from GDP. On this side of the chamber, we have delivered the right defence strategy for our nation, and we have ensured it is funded.
Senator McLaughlin, a final supplementary question.
Minister, how is the government supporting Australia's defence industry and its workers through these investments?
Senator Reynolds.
Thank you very much, Mr President. To deliver the Force Structure Plan, this government understands we need strong and enduring partnerships with Australian industry. And I am very proud to be part of a government that has unashamedly backed in Australian defence industry and the capability of Australian workers. The vast majority of the defence budget is spent right here in Australia. 32% on salaries of over 116,000 Australian personnel. 30% on sustainment, which is mostly spent right here across Australia, and 34% investment in new capability, which increasingly, as a result of our government's very deliberate policies, is being spent here in Australian industry. Over 15,000 Australian companies and 70,000 Australians are now benefiting directly from our investment in defence. And that number is growing rapidly.
Senator
even
Reynolds,
during
time for the
the
answer
COVID
has expired.
period.
We're going for the online trifecta today. Senator Rice.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for the Environment, Senator Birmingham. Last week, the Federal Court gave final orders in its judgment of illegal logging by VicForests, which took place under the Commonwealth State Regional Forest Agreements. The Court found that logging damages or destroys habitat critical to the survival of the critically endangered Leadbeater's possums and the threatened greater gliders, and awarded costs against VicForests. More federal court action was also—
Sorry, Senator Rice, please stop. I have asked before, when we're hearing questions online, that we have it in dead silence so we can all hear it. Please continue, Senator Rice.
Thank you. More federal court action was also launched last week, including against the Commonwealth, by the Bob Brown Foundation against logging in Tasmania, on the grounds that the Tasmanian Regional Forest Agreement does not have enforceable environmental protections that are required under the RFA Act. What action is the government planning on taking against this illegal logging?
The Minister representing the Minister for the Environment, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks very much, Mr. President. I thank the senator for her question. I don't necessarily accept all of the arguments or statements or claims that have been made by the senator in her question. My understanding is that, yes, the federal court made final orders on Friday the 21st of August following the judgment that was handed down in Friends of the Leadbeater's Possum v Vic Forest, which was handed down on 27 May of this year. The government is carefully considering this judgment and its implications. I understand other proceedings, as the senator referenced, were filed by the Bob Brown Foundation in relation to these matters. I hear some of the commentary from other colleagues on this matter, and indeed it would be of no surprise that the Bob Brown Foundation would indeed seek to disrupt any or all such activities that it could possibly find a means to disrupt, and that indeed a constant challenge in some of these areas are those who seek to use every possible means to delay, to defer, whether or not the legal grounds are there, but to ensure that the costs of proceeding with certain activities is ever greater. Now, in the end, it's crucial, Mr. President, that we have appropriate laws in place for the protection of the environment, but also for valuable economic activities like forestry to be able to be undertaken and provide the types of jobs, security and opportunities that they do in communities around the country, and our government is determined to make sure those frameworks work for those communities, work for the environment and work to preserve the jobs of those who rely upon them.
Senator Rice, a supplementary question.
Yes, Minister, given the failure of state governments to protect forests and threatened wildlife under the regional forest agreements, why is the government planning on handing over more power to the states, taking a chainsaw to our environment laws and slashing environmental protections in their changes to the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act? Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr. President. Well, I don't accept anything in terms of the approach there that Senator Rice has said. The government is by no means taking a chainsaw to any environmental regulation or protection, but we are going to certainly do our best to take a chainsaw to delays and to red tape and to additional costs, and to make sure that when environmental regulation is applied in Australia, it is applied for the protection of the environment, not for the delay, the deferral or applying additional costs onto viable economic activity and business activity. We want to see projects that can coexist with the environment go ahead without spending years in multiple duplicative approval processes. We want to make sure that those sorts of projects can actually happen and employ and create jobs for Australians without facing undue costs, unnecessary impositions, and that's why we work with states to do just that.
Senator Rice, a final supplementary question.
Yes, Minister, what does the government then say to the people of Australia who not only have seen illegal logging but have saw over 3 billion animals killed by last summer's climate crisis-fuelled bushfires, who want stronger laws to protect our forests and animals rather than having their very existence left to the mercy of big miners, developers and logging companies?
Senator Birmingham.
Well, thanks, Mr. President. Senator Rice is seeking to wrap up every single one of the Greens' primary headline-grabbing grievances in one supplementary question there. Now, the truth, Mr. President, the truth is that there are much more complicated issues at play when it comes to fire management, to forestry management, to natural resource management, than the way in which Senator Rice seeks to summarise it. That's why our government supported and drove the delivery of a Royal Commission into bushfires, which I have no doubt, when it hands down its findings, will demonstrate the complexity of the issues there in relation to bush management and to making sure that the nation is better equipped when it comes to bushfires in the future to prevent them. And there will be a range of land management questions and issues
addressed in that report, and we will no doubt then work through and respond effectively to those issues. But to simply summarise it in the way in which Senator Rice does, which seems to suggest that just locking up more land would somehow avoid bushfires, is clearly against the facts of the—
Senator Polley.
Mr President, my question is to the Minister for Aged Care and Senior Australians, Senator Colbeck. On the 11th of March, the minister said in a media release that the Morrison government would, and I quote, support aged care providers with personal protective equipment, resources for staff where it is needed, as part of the infection control measures. The Royal Commission heard evidence that aged care workers were told they could only use 2 masks per shift and only 1 glove. How did the minister allow this to happen?
The Minister for Aged Care and Senior Australians, Senator Colbeck.
Mr President, the press release that Senator Polley refers to relates to our provision of PPE and surge workforce into residential aged care facilities that have had a COVID-19 outbreak. And that's exactly what we did. So, Mr President, every aged care facility that has had a COVID outbreak, has had a provision of PPE provided to it. And in fact, if you go back to that point in time, Mr President, you will note that there was a global shortage of PPE at that point in time, and this government has built a significant, Mr President, a significant stockpile of PPE to provide to residential aged care providers.
Wong on a point of order. Senator Wong.
Thank you, Mr President. Direct relevance. There was a direct question about 2 masks per shift and only one glove. It's reasonable, I think, for Australians to know why that occurred on this minister's watch. I'll ask him to respond to that aspect of the question.
Senator Cormann on the point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr President. There was way more to that question, and the minister could not have been more directly relevant to the question if he had tried.
In listening carefully to the answer, the minister is talking about personal protective equipment and its provision, which is directly relevant to the question. There's an opportunity to debate questions after question time, but the minister is being directly relevant. Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. So, in every circumstance of a COVID-19 outbreak, the assessment of the first responder goes in and looks at the stocks of PPE in the facility to ensure that they are adequate and to ensure that, well, Mr President, too late then is the call, Mr President. All providers are required under the Act to have adequate stocks of PPE, Mr President. That is their responsibility. So the providers in that circumstance, Mr President, need to step up, Mr President.
Senator Pratt, I've called you to order 3 times during this
outbreak of COVID-19, one of the things that we have made sure, Mr President, is that they have availability of PPE because it is absolutely critical, Mr President. PPE is critical in managing a COVID-19 outbreak within a facility.
On a point of order.
Point of order, direct relevance. 2 masks per shift or 1 glove. Why?
Senator Wong, that was part of the question. The minister's talking about the provision and requirement for this equipment. I hold that he is directly relevant. There's an opportunity to debate it after question time. Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. So in every circumstance where there's been an outbreak of COVID-19, we have ensured that there is adequate supplies of PPE into the facilities. That has been part of the work that our case managers have done on a daily basis, Mr President, to ensure that infection control can be managed within facilities.
Senator Polley is on her feet. Senator Polley is on her feet. Senator Polley, a supplementary question.
Senator Griff asked the minister how much of the $205 million committed in May for staffing, training and PPE was actually spent on those items. Can the minister now answer that question, and can he confirm this $205 million was paid as a supplement and no conditions were imposed on the spending of the money?
Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. Thanks, Senator Polley, for the question. And as I said to Senator Griff earlier in the week, that there will be reporting on that funding that was applied by to aged care providers, and it will be provided in their annual reconciliation, Mr President, which is publicly reported. So when that reconciliation comes in, Mr President, it'll be reported to the Aged Care Finance Authority, and it will be publicly reported. It'll be available for anyone to have a look at, Mr President. So we provided additional—
Order. Senator Wong on a point of order.
Mr President, this direct relevance, he's had 24 hours to get this information. He might try and fob it off that there's an annual reconciliation. People are dying. A reasonable question about PPE has been asked. I'd ask the minister to answer it. He can hide behind procedures, Mr President, but this is an important question.
Senator Wong. Senator Cormann on the point of order.
On the point of order. Senator Wong, in raising this point of order, is completely disregarding your previous ruling, and she's even interjecting as I'm taking a point of order. Mr. President, as presidents before you, including President Hogg, have said often, you can ask the question, you can require it to be directly relevant, you can't actually provide the answer yourself. Like, if you want to take note of the answer, there's a time after question time to do so.
On the point of order, the minister is I'll rule when there's silence. The minister is talking about the matter raised in the question, i.e. the supplement. I cannot instruct him how to answer a question. There's an opportunity afterwards to debate answers, but he is being directly relevant to the question. Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. So, as I was saying, Mr President, all providers are required to lodge annual returns. There are conditions on those annual returns, Mr President, and so that information will be available once those annual returns are submitted.
Senator Polley, order. Order. Senator Polley, a final supplementary question.
Melbourne aged care worker Lena has said that infection bags filled with contaminated PPE were sitting in a big pile so high it was literally up to the neighbour's fence line. Why has the minister still failed to ensure workers and residents have the protection they needed and deserve?
Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. The issue of waste PPE in Melbourne over the last 4 weeks has been quite a considerable one, Mr President. If you consider that an aged care facility with a COVID outbreak produces something in the order of 6 cubic metres of PPE waste per day, that creates quite a significant problem. But one of the really good things that's occurred through the Victorian Aged Care Response Centre has been able to manage the waste. We actually, during that period of time, had a breakdown in one of the incinerators that was disposing of the waste of PPE in Victoria, and we also had some regulatory problems, Mr President, in having enough heavy vehicles that were licensed to be able to move the PPE away, Mr President. But those things have all been worked through the auspices of the Victorian Aged Care Response Centre. So, Mr President, it may very well have been that a nurse saw large piles of waste PPE outside a facility. The COVID-19 outbreak creates considerable
has expired. Senator O'Sullivan.
Thank you very much, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Employment, Skills, Small and Family Business, Senator Cash. Minister, this week is the 10th National Skills Week, a week dedicated to raising the profile and status of vocational learning, dispelling outdated myths and showcasing the attractive career opportunities for all Australians. Can the minister update the Senate on how the Morrison government's skills reform agenda has strengthened our vocational and education system?
The Minister for Employment, Skills, Small and Family Business, Senator Cash.
Well, Mr President, thank you very much. And I acknowledge the strong interest that Senator O'Sullivan has had in vocational education and training throughout his career. But it is National Skills Week this week, and it is the 10th National Skills Week, and we're certainly celebrating what vocational education and training is able to offer to Australians. But, Mr President, in particular now with the impact of COVID-19, both here in Australia but globally, what we've seen is the acceleration in the change in the nature of work. What we are very much focused on now as a government is that our capacity to grow, to thrive and to create more jobs is very much dependent on employers and individuals, regardless of their background, regardless of their circumstances, being able to access the right skills at the right time. And that is exactly what a strong vocational education and training sector can do for Australians. Mr President, the government understands the key role that vocational education and training plays in delivering Australians with the right skills for employers. And that is why, as a government, colleagues, we are investing a record $6.5 billion. I'll just say that again for the benefit of those on the other side. The Morrison government is investing a record $6.5 billion in our schools system. Mr President, we know that you need to reform the schools system in Australia. The mess that those on the other side left, and I will address that in future questions, is still being paid for by Australians. That is why we're investing an additional $6.5 billion in skills reform across Australia. And in particular, we are focusing on wage subsidies so that small and medium businesses across Australia are able to keep their apprentices and trainees in training. We're also looking at ensuring that our skills sector responds properly to areas of demand.
Senator Cash. Senator O'Sullivan, a supplementary question.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Following the government's successful and, might I add, swift negotiation of a new Heads of Agreement for National Skills Funding and Reform, what will the government's further reform priorities to support job creation and a skilled Australia deliver?
Senator Cash.
Well, Mr President, in addition to investing a record $6.5 billion in our skills system, what Senator Watt does not appreciate is that the greatest fall in apprentice numbers on record occurred, colleagues, 2012-13, when they fell, Senator Watt, by 110,000 or 22%. That was under Senator Watt, the former Labor government. In addition, over 2 years, Senator Watt, the former Labor government gutted $1.2 billion from employer incentives. They were not incentivised to take on apprentices because you gutted the system. Since we have been in office, we have progressively reformed vocational education and training in Australia. As I said, we are investing now a record $6.5 billion in our skills system, and that includes getting rid of Labor's NASWAD, the National Agreement on Skills and Workforce Development, and replacing it with
Senator
a
Cash.
new
Time for
funding
the answer
agreement.
has expired. Senator O'Sullivan, a final supplementary question.
Thank you very much, Mr President. I thank the minister for that answer. Minister, can you please update the Senate on the government supporting apprentices and trainees' wage subsidy,
Senator Cash,
and how this program is preserving our skilled workforce through the economic impacts of COVID-19?
My apologies, Senator O'Sullivan. Senator Cash.
Well, thank you, Mr President. What the government is doing, and in particular as a result of COVID-19, because we do know that apprentices and trainees are affected when there is a downturn in the economy, we've put in place a $2.8 billion supporting apprentices and trainees wage subsidy. We're extending the subsidy to apprentices employed by medium businesses. Well, initially it was focused on small businesses. We're now extending it to medium businesses in Australia. The extended wage subsidy will now support around 90,000 businesses, employing around 180,000 apprentices. And in fact, Mr President, to date, or as at the 21st of August, the program has supported around 50,700 businesses to retain over 88,000 apprentices. And this is despite the impact that COVID-19 is having on the economy. And in fact, Senator O'Sullivan, in the state of Western Australia, 6,227 apprentices and trainees are currently being supported by the $2.8 billion wage subsidy that we put in place.
Senator Wong.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Aged Care and Senior Australians, Senator Colbeck. Given the multiple warnings, including the interim report of the Royal Commission entitled Neglect, warnings from the Northern Hemisphere, warnings from experts and unions, and the warnings presented by Dorothy Henderson Lodge in March and Newmarch House in April, how could Mr Morrison possibly claim on the 29th of July that the risks to aged care couldn't be, and I quote, anticipated or foreshadowed?
The Minister for Aged Care and Senior Australians, Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. In fact, the report to Newmarch Lodge that we released last week also stated that some of the risks and some of the events that had occurred couldn't have been anticipated. So it's not just Mr Morrison or the government saying those things. That was actually part of the report that was conducted into Newmarch. That is a pretty low thing to say, Senator Gallagher. That is a pretty low. So you want to cast a slur on the health professionals who do a professional report into Newmarch Lodge. I reckon that's a pretty low thing to do, Mr. President. Mr. President, all through this pandemic, Mr. President, what this government has done has taken the advice of the health experts. The chief medical officer, the chief health officers of each state, the deputy health officers, deputy chief medical officers, and all of the officials who have provided us with medical advice through this pandemic. And we have based our actions on the advice of those medical professionals, Mr. President. All of them. The initial work that was done through the national COVID-19 health response, which pulled together the hospitals' agreements that provided support, particularly in Victoria when things got really bad there, both in the context of places for people to go, but also for surge workforce. The guidance of the CDNA, Mr. President, who provided comprehensive work and guidance to the aged care sector with respect to infection control and management. All of those things combined, Mr. President, were where we acted based on the advice of those health professionals who put us in the best position possible to manage our way through the COVID-19 pandemic.
Order. Senator Wong, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Despite this minister claiming that he's responded incredibly well, that we're extremely fortunate and that the government's response is a high watermark, this minister has failed to give one example of action, not discussion, not talking, but action he's taken in response to warning after warning after warning. Don't the 200,000 Australians in aged care deserve a minister who will get it right and take real action instead of endless talk fests and self-congratulation?
Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, the opposition take words that have been used by me and put them in a different form to some sort of their own political purpose, Mr. President. And quite frankly, the dishonesty of the Labor Party, who continue to misuse and misrepresent my words, becomes a bit tiring, Mr. President. It is clear, Mr. President, that we have continued to act on the advice of those health professionals who have guided us all the way through this COVID-19 pandemic. And I have seen, Mr. President, every day working and talking to the case managers that are looking after each of the facilities that have a COVID-19 outbreak, acting on the learnings from previous experience, ensuring that capacity is available, and we have continued, as I've said a number of times, to build the capacity that we required, whether that be in waste management, whether that be surge workforce, whether that be hospital capacity.
Time for the answers expired. Senator Wong, a final supplementary question.
Given this morning not one of the minister's colleagues rose to their feet in his defence, given that Mr Morrison has sidelined him from decisions in his own portfolio, and given that the Prime Minister has handballed defence of him to Minister Hunt in the House of Representatives in question time today, can he explain why older Australians should have to wait for a reshuffle before they get a minister who's capable of getting it right?
Senator Colbeck.
Mr. President, as I said this morning, the thing that I have not done through this debate and through this pandemic is attempt to play politics with it like Labor has. I have spoken at every turn to my shadow and answered her questions and provided information to her, and to be frank, Mr. President, not received much advice that's of use, Mr. President. I have rung, Mr. President, I have rung Labor members of Parliament. I have rung Labor members of Parliament to provide them advice and provide them information with respect to outbreaks in their seats. I have escalated the issues that they have brought to me to ensure that their constituents were properly looked after as part of the way that we deal with this pandemic, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, I will not be verbaled by Labor. I will not have my words misrepresented by
Order,
them, Mr.
Senator
President.
Colbeck. Time for the answers expired. Senator Askew.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is to the Minister for Families and Social Services, Senator Ruston. Can the minister update the Senate on her recent meeting with international counterparts and how Australia's approach to the COVID-19 pandemic compares to other countries?
The Minister for Families and Social Services, Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you very much, Senator Askew, for the question around a really important meeting that I held during this week. Internationally, I have been speaking with a number of my counterparts overseas, but this week I actually spoke to my social services colleagues in the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada and New Zealand, so that we could discuss our social policy responses to this once-in-a-generation, once-in-a-lifetime, once-in-a-century coronavirus pandemic. I must say that it was tremendously informative and productive to be able to discuss on the issues that are temporarily facing just about every country in the world, and to speak to them about the plans that they have employed to date and plans that they intend to employ going forward. Because, of course, as we come out of the health crisis, we now have to work about how we are going to recover from this pandemic and transition to what will be a new normal. We're all facing shared challenges, and all ministers said that whilst our primary focus had been, of course, to put things in place as quickly as possible to address the needs of people, now is the time for us to start discussing how we might assist our countries and the people in our countries to be able to get back onto the other side, to how to get our workforces back stood up again, but at the same time making sure that we continue to support the people of our countries. The United Kingdom and the United States have very much focused their packages so far on supporting people in employment situations and making sure that they retain their connection to the workplace. Likewise in Australia, but also in Canada and New Zealand, we've coupled that with not just working with people in the workforce, but making sure that we put additional supports in place for people who find themselves without of work. Given the fact that this pandemic has affected every country in the world, we thought it was very important that we shared experiences so that we can hopefully get through this pandemic better.
Senator Ruston. Senator Askew, a supplementary question.
Thank you. Can the minister advise the Senate of what transitional support arrangements are in place in other countries?
Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Well, all ministers at the meeting are currently grappling with the transition phase and how they will deal with the support packages that are in place and how best they can reopen their economies, support people who continue to be impacted by this pandemic through hardship, and to ensure that we maintain a control of the spread of the virus. Amongst our international peers, Australia is regarded as extraordinarily highly, and they were all very interested to learn that we'd made the decision that we would extend the level of support, additional support that we are putting in place for people who are unemployed, but in addition that the JobKeeper payments were going to be continued out until March. Canada advised that their emergency response benefit is set to end in October and their emergency wage subsidy will finish in December. New Zealand announced that their income relief payments will end in November and their wage subsidies in September. The UK job retention and income supports will end in October, and the United States announced that all their measures were set to end on the 31st of December.
Order. Senator Askew, a final supplementary question.
Thank you. Minister, how will you continue to work with your international colleagues as the world manages the COVID-19 crisis?
Senator Ruston.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, we will continue to work together. We will continue to share ideas with other countries as we move into the recovery phase. And at the meeting, we all agreed that we would continue to share information that is critical for all of us in our ongoing recovery, the world's recovery and our individual countries' recovery from COVID-19. In addition, our officials will have agreed to continue to meet on a regular basis and to work through the challenges and discuss how we might plan to overcome them and make sure that we're learning from each other. Because clearly learning from each other will also offer the opportunity for us to be able to share with other countries the learnings that we've found here in Australia to be helpful to us. We are committed to continue to monitor the situation as it unfolds, because we know that the best way to be able to respond to this is to remain extraordinarily agile. I have agreed to continue on a regular basis to meet with my international colleagues, and can I please put on the record my thanks to Ministers Hagan, Davies, Hossain and Cepoloni for taking the time to partake in these valuable discussions.
Senator Cormann.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask that further questions be placed on a notice paper.
Senator